But first, I apologise, Australia. This farce here in Victoria just got even crazier. Security guards in quarantine hotels having sex with people there? Really? You'd laugh if 300,000 Victorians weren't now in a kind of lockdown all over again, in a kind of police state. And you'd laugh if this didn't now threaten other parts of the country. Today, the Northern Territory recorded its first coronavirus infection in nearly 3 months. Guess who? A man who had stayed in one of these now notorious quarantine hotels in Melbourne and then stayed with relatives in one of the now lockdown suburbs before flying to Darwin. In Victoria today, by the way, 77 new infections, worryingly nearly half in suburbs that have not yet been locked down. I guess we should be grateful that this spike has now plateaued, or seems to have so far, and just 15 people are in hospital, which is interesting. Maybe we shouldn't be in quite this panic. But back to the scandal, the bungling, and today's new revelations, and the Victorian government's outrageous refusal to come clean about what's gone on. To reports in the Herald Sun today about the quarantine hotels where much of this latest outbreak started and from where it escaped. These supposed quarantine hotels deal with returning travellers who have been our biggest source of infection. So these hotels should have been shut up as tight as a drum to make sure the infection didn't get out. Instead, the Victorian government essentially got amateurs to do the security there. Not police, not prison guards, not Defence Force staff like you see in some other states, private security guards. And we're now told by insiders, talking to the Herald Sun, that these guards allegedly got next to no training, next to no protective gear. We're told that some even went from hotel to hotel, working there, working here, even worked at other venues, which of course increases the chances of breakouts, which there were. And then there were the phantom staff, allegedly. Staff employed who didn't actually exist. Still pay went out to who knows who, but they weren't there to do the job that you paid them for. In fact, there are even allegations, unconfirmed. But I've heard these for a couple of weeks now. And then allegations to Talkback Radio, same story. Some guards even slept with the travellers. They were meant to be keeping in quarantine. Don't know if it's true, but that's what we keep hearing. One guard spoke about this absolutely incredible bungling to Channel 9, despite having signed an agreement demanded by this very secretive government not to speak of what he'd seen.
How much training did you get?
5 minutes, yeah. And that was the PPE and everything, box of dice, and then you were sent up to your level.
To make matters worse, the training was conducted by the head of the company's car park management. But the real problem, he says, has been subcontractors who were hired by security companies to work as guards at a much cheaper rate.
As I said, you'd laugh if it wasn't so serious. These insiders, if they hadn't risked legal action to tell us what they'd actually seen, none of us would be much wiser. Because the Premier overseeing this disaster, well, he sure isn't going to level with the people he had in absurdly tough quarantine conditions themselves, locked up in houses, not able to go surfing and golfing and hiking outside or fishing, all those things that made no bit of difference. But he isn't going to tell us about what went wrong about this quarantine that he was supposedly in charge of. Yes, it's called a judicial inquiry, but that's for the future. And that now gives him an excuse to say nothing now, an excuse to stonewall, as we saw last night.
The recommendation at the National Cabinet level was to use police and the Defence Force to manage the quarantine hotels. That's what's happening in New South Wales. Why did Victoria reject that advice and opt for a private contractor instead?
Well, I think, Lee, there's been private contractors used in multiple sites around the country. There are a number of staff who, despite knowing about infection control protocols, have decided to make a number of errors They give you one example. We think one of these outbreaks may well be attributable to people sharing a cigarette lighter, something as innocent as that.
What? As innocent as having sex with people in quarantine too? Who knows, and who will tell? What is telling is the Prime Minister today defending Andrews. It's like a mutual protection club between these guys. You know, I won't rock your boat if you won't rock mine. I'll praise you if you'll praise me. And as for your right to know what the hell went on, forget that.
Well, I'm obviously concerned about the outbreak, and I'm pleased that the Premier has taken the action that he has taken, both in putting in place the lockdown for the outbreak in those suburbs in Western Melbourne. That was the appropriate response, and they have our full support in implementing it and whatever additional resources they seek. Obviously, what has happened with the quarantine, I think the Premier's been pretty upfront about that and pretty honest.
Upfront? Not by any dictionary definition of upfront I've ever seen. Do you think what you just heard from Daniel Andrews, Dictator Dan they're now calling him in Victoria, was upfront? Really? As for upfront, how about Victoria's Police Minister today, the woman supposedly helping to oversee this most critical part of our defences against the virus, keeping people locked in quarantine? Did she know anything about what the whistleblowers are now saying?
If people have acted inappropriate like that, they should be held to account and the inquiry should get to the bottom of it.
Have you heard those allegations before?
Just what I've heard in the newspapers.
And this minister, Lisa Neville, I can't tell you how often she used this judicial inquiry that's going to report long after the heat's over as an excuse to say nothing now. Thanks to Peter Credden for this compilation from Neville's Tell Them Nothing press conference today.
We'll get to hopefully through the inquiry. Again, the inquiry will tell us who's behaved what way, in which way, and the inquiry should get to the bottom of it. That's what the inquiry is about. Rightly or wrongly, let's see what the inquiry says about those decisions. Let's see whether what the inquiry says about that decision-making process. It is not my role to say point the blame at anyone. That is the role of the inquiry to look at. Again, I'm just going to leave it to the inquiry.
What a joke. But as I said, who's laughing? Certainly not the people in Melbourne's northern suburbs and the western ones who are instead locked in their homes again, going broke, going nuts with frustration. They're certainly not laughing when most would know that this government even let 1/3 of the people kept in these quarantine hotels to eventually go home without even a test to see if they were infected. And just look now at the teams of people that this government is sending from door to door to ask people in these lockdown suburbs to take tests and stay home. They themselves, no social distancing, not one face mask in this group, and only one face mask I could see in the next one. There were about 20 people there. No wonder 10% of the people in these suburbs are refusing to take those tests. But true, another reason for that high rate of refusal in those suburbs, according to the Federal Acting Chief Medical Officer today, is the high number of ethnic minorities in them. Cultural barriers, he says, language barriers. Although, of course, when I mention that multicultural problem, and doesn't Melbourne do multicultural madly, when I mentioned this multicultural problem a couple of weeks ago, you should see how many threats I've been sent, my editor's been sent. Oh, we're going to report you to the Press Council. We're going to report you to the Human Rights Commission. We're going to sue you. You should be sacked. See, that's the problem here. So many Australians are being snowed about this. And if you try to get to the truth, try to analyse what went wrong, well, you ask that security guard I showed you earlier about that danger. Got to sign a little document. Don't say anything or else. This is not good enough. Not good enough. Premier Daniel Andrews should cut that spin and give us the facts. Why should people in these lockdown suburbs, 36 of them, why should they trust him if he won't trust them with the truth? Australians deserve it. Because from Darwin to Melbourne, we're all paying for this mess.